Welcome to the debate. What if the unshakable foundation of the world's soundest money is actually under siege and, perhaps by the very people tasked with securing it? This is really the core philosophical rift we're seeing dominate the dialogue around Bitcoin right now, especially crystallized by this recent surge in data insertion and, well, transaction burden, what people are calling the spam wars.
hmm And it's a critical moment, really. We're seeing this stark tension between those who view the Layer 1 protocol as essentially complete, like a monetary artifact, and, well, others who believe the system still needs to evolve, maybe cautiously, but evolve nonetheless, just to ensure its long-term viability and competitiveness.
Exactly. Yeah. The source material really highlights this profound division, particularly through the powerful defense we've heard recently of a very minimal, highly conservative approach to Layer 1 development. So the central question we really need to tackle is this. Does active protocol expansion constitute an essential, almost like a disease of inflation and risk that has to be resisted at all costs? Or is measured consensus-driven change actually necessary to ensure the network's stability and, its eventual success?
Right. The governance of this, I mean, it's a decentralized trillion-dollar system. It demands intellectual honesty, not paralysis.
Okay, so my position is that the inherent risks and, frankly, the moral hazards of changing the base layer are just too great. I'm arguing for a strict application of what you might call the small protocol philosophy, treating the protocol almost like the permanent, quasi-legislative body of monetary law.
And I'm going to challenge that framing. I'll argue that absolute, strictly enforced ossification, well, it's a dangerous and probably unrealistic goal. It tends to conflate beneficial technical optimization with genuine monetary debasement. And in doing so, it sort of ignores historical necessity.
The philosophy here is fundamental. If Bitcoin is truly going to succeed as a global reserve currency, its protocol has to be treated like the foundational law of a new nation, a system of rules designed ideally to last 1,000 years. So the political philosophy has got to be small government, or in our case, small protocol. We have to do the absolute minimum necessary just to keep the lights on and enforce that 21 million supply limit. The risks of straying from this are, I think, pretty clear. Adding unnecessary functionality or introducing complex features. What some might describe as dumping another million lines of code. It creates these inflationary dynamics within the protocol itself. And this isn't just code, it's law in cyberspace.
Every single addition arguably devalues the core attributes of simplicity, robustness. It undermines security by increasing the attack surface. And fundamentally, it encroaches upon economic activities that really should be handled entirely by the free market on layers 2 and 3. Any change at all that benefits one special interest group to the perceived disadvantage of the, let's say, original economic actors, well, that is, by definition, a profound moral hazard.
That's a powerful way to put it, linking code changes directly to, well, moral decay. And I understand the need for maximum defense against unnecessary risk. Absolutely. However, the premise that the protocol must be entirely static to be successful, I think that overlooks the reality of complex systems, especially ones operating in such a dynamic technical environment. The belief that you have to change the protocol sometimes, not whimsically, of course, but through careful, consensus-driven evolution, isn't necessarily hubris. It might just be a pragmatic recognition that, even foundational infrastructure sometimes needs maintenance, needs efficiency upgrades, just to remain viable. And I have real difficulty with applying the term inflation so broadly. Applying it to bandwidth or functionality changes, that risks becoming more of a rhetorical device, maybe designed to shut down productive conversation rather than reflecting a clear technical reality. We have to distinguish between changes that genuinely threaten core security or the monetary properties, like, say, tampering with the SHA-256 process, which would be catastrophic, and changes that might provide crucial performance or scalability improvements,
Things like increasing transaction efficiency, which could actually ensure the network remains usable and globally competitive in the long run.
That distinction you make, that's where our core disagreement really surfaces, I think. I maintain that the inflation I'm describing isn't just rhetorical, it's inherently economic. Let's look at the mechanism for a second. The whole foundation of network security relies on the economics of block space scarcity, right? Mining is profitable because block space is finite, allowing miners to capture a scarcity premium through transaction fees. Now, if you substantially increase the transaction bandwidth or dilute the block space by allowing, the insertion of massive amounts of arbitrary non-monetary data, you essentially create a hyperinflation of the available capacity. It's a sort of second-order economic effect. And this economic pressure, it can bankrupt existing Bitcoin miners. It deprives them of expected revenue streams, their property rights, really, their investment in hardware, the scarcity premium of the blocks they produce. Bankrupting miners leads straight to an ethical lapse, an economic lapse, and, most critically, a security lapse, because it destabilizes the entire proof-of-work mechanism. We're adding complexity, which contributes to increased node operational costs, UTXO set growth. It just further increases the burden on the whole ecosystem. This kind of creeping technical debt, that is the insidious form of protocol inflation I'm talking about.
Okay, I'm sorry, but I still find that leap from, say, increased bandwidth or technical efficiency to hyperinflation problematic. Let me explain why. That strict definition seems to confuse performance optimization with actual monetary debasement. Bitcoin's primary escape from fiat inflation is guaranteed by the fixed supply cap, the 21 million coins. That's sacrosanct. Changes like SegWit or even efficiency upgrades like Schnorr signatures, they were designed to solve genuine technical limitations and scaling disputes without ever touching that 21 million limit. SegWit, which you just defined as protocol inflation, well, it was arguably a necessary fix during the block size wars. It primarily addressed transaction malleability, and it increased the efficiency in how data was stored, resolving a critical bottleneck. If we start defining all increases in efficiency or capacity as inflation, we risk paralyzing the network entirely. Stagnation, especially in a globally competitive financial system where nation states and corporations are constantly looking for faster, cheaper alternatives, stagnation itself is arguably a systemic risk just as damaging as introducing some technical flaw. We have to be willing to accept consensus-driven changes that make the protocol more efficient and robust, provided they strictly maintain the monetary integrity.
I appreciate the point about technical maintenance, I do. But the philosophical danger of allowing the system to become, let's say, rich with features, that's too great. Let's look at the metaphor that comes up in the source material. Every empire, right, starts small and struggling, fighting for survival. Then it eventually wins, it gets rich, and then, almost invariably, it starts creating more and more ridiculous laws and regulations, in our case, protocol features and complexity, and that leads inevitably to monetary inflation and eventual collapse. Bitcoin must resist the temptation of becoming a big protocol. If we truly treat Layer 1 code as law in cyberspace, then every functional addition is like a new law, a new regulation. It creates exceptions, complexities. It erodes the original promise of a simple, immutable monetary base. Developers, acting as the de facto lawyers of this digital nation, they have to exercise maximum constraint. Their focus has to be solely on the core functions that protect the monetary purity of the asset.
That's a very compelling analogy for maintaining discipline, and I certainly agree that the temptation to add unnecessary complexity has to be resisted, absolutely. However, if we take that small protocol philosophy to an absolute unyielding extreme, well, don't we risk ignoring the external, non-code-based attacks that true stability is actually supposed to defend against? The network's security isn't solely determined by keeping the number of lines of code static. The source material itself points this out, highlighting the distinct possibility of a social attack or perhaps regulatory capture. Now, if the protocol remains rigidly static, incapable of adapting to changing environmental pressures, like, say, sudden regulatory risk from a major nation-state or maybe the need to quickly implement efficiency updates just to maintain node decentralization, doesn't that stagnation itself become the true security risk? Stability in a living system arguably requires some capacity for necessary, consensus-driven evolution. Otherwise, the system might just become obsolete, or perhaps an easier target for external coercion.
But the greatest external threat, I would argue, is triggered when internal faith is eroded. And this brings us squarely to the profound institutional risk. When changes are pushed through that bypass or maybe actively work against broad consensus, it completely eliminates the faith and trust in the stewards of the network. And this introduces risks that existing holders, people who bought into the protocol based on its current parameters, well, they didn't sign up for that. Consider the enormous stakes now held by major institutional players. Think about the recently approved ETFs holding millions of BTC. These funds provide a massive pool of stability, right? Now, if developers disregard the network's core value proposition, which is sound, simple, stable money, by adding arbitrary data or features that just increase technical debt, well, that can easily be interpreted as a breach of trust. And that could provide, as the source suggests, an excuse to dump on the public for these large institutional holders. That could potentially set back Bitcoin's path as the global reserve currency by, who knows, a decade or two. The stability of the asset requires absolute intellectual integrity and real constraint from those writing the law.
Yeah, the slippery slope argument regarding institutional flight it's serious. I certainly concede that intellectual integrity and maintaining trust in the development process are absolutely paramount. Any perceived ethical lapse in governance could easily trigger massive sell-offs, no question. However, focusing too heavily on potential institutional dumping, maybe that distracts from the immediate technical choice, which is fundamentally playing out in a decentralized way. We're actually observing, I think, the highest form of distributed consensus in action right now. This perceived philosophical disagreement, well, it seems to be inadvertently strengthening the system. The source material itself shows the free market is kind of blossoming from this very conflict. We're seeing major stakeholders encouraged to run alternative clients, like Nods or LibBitcoin, and competitive mining pool solutions like Ocean and Stratum are gaining traction. This active competition proves the system is decentralized, and it's highly resistant to easy capture or single-point governance. Maybe the conflict itself, by fostering this resilience, is actually the greatest defense against systemic failure.
That's a legitimate silver lining, that the market reaction might force greater decentralization of the technical stack. I'll grant you that. But it doesn't negate the moral hazard of the initial action, which is adding complexity that potentially deprives participants of their economic rights and fundamentally shifts the risk profile of the network. The goal is base-level sound money, and any change that sacrifices that simplicity or undermines integrity must be resisted.
I agree completely that the monetary layer must be protected above all else. Ensuring sound money integrity is the bedrock. But I still maintain that the rigorous challenge of development, even through these highly charged philosophical disagreements, is actually essential. It helps prevent an ossification that could lead to external failure down the line. The value lies in maintaining a balance, a base layer that's immutable in its monetary principles, absolutely, but perhaps adaptable in its technical function, allowing the system to address real-world scaling and efficiency issues without sacrificing those core promises.
The integrity of the system's law, that's the anchor.
And the ability to adapt to external reality, well, that's the necessary sail.
Understanding this tension, this push and pull between stability through minimal intervention and stability through necessary adaptation, it's crucial for anyone really engaging with this material. This substantive discourse, I hope, illuminates the fundamental governance challenges that face any decentralized system designed for permanence.
Indeed, it certainly demonstrates that the path to sound money is, well, never simple, even when the code itself intends it to be.
Thank you for joining us on The Debate. We encourage all our listeners to follow, like, and share the content. And please follow What Bitcoin Taught Me on Twitter, X, Nostr, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.